Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar this afternoon. We're going to be covering a number of things with a number of leaders in the industry around supply chain and pricing. So just to give you guys some basic ground rules, if you are not speaking at a particular time, I'm going to actually ask that you would turn your camera off and mute yourselves. I'm going to do the same, but that way if your phone rings, if something happens, we won't all be part of that conversation with you. We have with us today Mike Green, who is a market analyst with Carter Lumber. He's actually going to kick us off in just a second and give us some insights. I think he's going to tell us that 2022 is our year, but he will share what he has available. Steve Caldwell, who is a sales rep with Ferguson, is also going to be sharing. We have David Logan with us, and he came dressed in his professional best, so we're giving extra props for that. He is going to kind of share where the whole of the industry is at for the building industry. His expertise is that he is an economist with the NAHB. And then Nick Horrigan is joining us from Harpst Becker. He's going to help us with our contract options and language to sort of help manage client expectations in this moment when everything is incredibly variable. And then we'll do some takeaways and remaining Q&As. Feel free to drop questions in the chat box. You can do that either as a chat to the group, or you can direct those directly to Lori or I. We'll be happy to make sure that your question gets directed to the right speaker. So I'm going to hand it over to Mike, and you can impart to us your wisdom for where we're at and where you see us headed.
Well, thanks for having me. Want to start off with part of what I do is try and analyze and project what I think is going to happen. A lot of this is just opinion, especially since historically we have no idea and no information to go back and base this off of. I'm going to start with going up all the way back to 2019 and kind of setting up where we were and walk all the way through it. Some of the information that I share probably carries over into some of the other people's topics, and then kind of just give you a quick recap of where we started, how we got there, where we're at, and kind of what I think's going on and some things that I think are coming up. Usually we have about 400,000 housing starts worth of material somewhere in inventory in the system, whether that's at the mill, at the wholesalers, or in a retail location. Production usually is somewhere between 1.2 to 1.4 million housing starts. So at any given time, we have somewhere around 1.4, 1.6 million housing starts worth of material within a calendar year. What happened was when COVID hit, production slowed down because people, one, thought that there wasn't going to be a large consumption, and two, they were forced to close for scheduled shutdowns for lockdowns. What really happened was people were trapped at home, figured out that, hey, I'm at home, I don't have anything better to do, let's do some remodeling or fix some other stuff. Or, oh my goodness, I'm trapped at home with my family and I don't want to live with mom and dad next year, so I want to buy a house. Add to that, that interest rates are cheap and the housing markets just exploded this year. So they used up about 1.6 million housing starts worth of material last year. We only produce about 1.4 million a year, and we only had about 400,000 in reserve. So it ate up almost all of the reserve and all of the production. In the winter slowdown, we didn't have any chance to reset that inventory because consumption pace kept up. So we started this building season with not a lot of inventory, and at the beginning of the year, they were saying it was going to be like 1.77 million housing starts. That's been adjusted, but our consumption is way above what the production level is. Production's still having problems with trying to get enough labor to come to work, trying to get enough trucking to you, trying to handle all of the orders and take care of the back orders. So that's created a shortage, and that's really what you see in the big spike that we have. With trucking being a problem, it's extended our lead times. So even if we can get enough production, we can't get it where we need it to quick enough. And that's driven pricing up. You saw that really, the best example of that was in May. We reached our maximum pricing historically ever. And a lot of that was driven by the fact that lead times were out to 12 weeks on lumber, which is typically something that you could call a wholesaler and get in 2 or 3 weeks. Right now, we're down to about a 5 to 6 week lead time. Sometimes it's 3 to 5 based on trucking, but really that 6 weeks probably a good guess. With railroad cars right now, we're still out at 8 weeks. And I used to figure 45 days or 6 weeks for railroad cars. The second big problem we had was there was an ice storm in Texas this year. It froze all of the resin manufacturers, and that's created shortages across everything. Glue, OSB, windows, vinyl, plastic, you name it. That has been corrected from the production side, so they're actually manufacturing resin again. Trucking is still an issue with getting it where it needs to go. And those manufacturers are starting to produce enough to get back to a more regular supply chain. I don't really see that getting significantly better till the end of September or early October. That'll kind of let us know where those supply chain issues have panned out to. Some of the other guys can probably speak better to that than I can. The reason I bring it up is OSB and wall sheeting, whether it's foam or whatever, relies very heavily on those resins. And that added to the OSB shortage. That shortage is probably going to continue through the end of this year. We'll probably make a little bit of headway. And then next year, we're going to start next building season in a spot that'll be better than it was this year, but I don't think it's going to be fantastic. I think we're going to see extremely high priced OSB, probably all the way through till the end of next year, and not get back into a more normal, and by that I mean double what you remember OSB at, price range till somewhere in 2023. From the lumber side, we're actually coming to a balance. You're starting to see a little bit of that now. I think that the numbers that we're at currently is probably where our trading levels are going to establish itself. It's probably going to bounce in the next week or two and do its normal seasonal trend. So I think from a lumber standpoint, we're going to see trends that were very similar to historics, but they're not going to be at half of the price that they are now, which is what historically the averages are. I think we're going to maintain the level that we're at now, but follow a more typical trend through the end of this year and into next year. OSB, like I said, wall sheetings, I think that the production is not going to be able to continue to keep pace, and that's going to keep the prices elevated. I don't foresee them coming down like the lumber did to the significant levels that it has, but there will be a little bit more availability as we kind of get who's consuming and who's supplying balanced a little better. So the extreme shortages should go away, at least in the short term. LVL is another big issue. It's an engineered product that uses the veneers that plywood does as well as resin. That is going to be like OSB. That issue is going to be extremely difficult to deal with through the end of this year and probably most of next year. At one point, I saw the CEO of Weyerhaeuser had gotten on and said that we're probably 6 or 7 months into a 30-month long problem. That's the first time I had heard anyone besides a smaller group of people that I deal with personally talking anything that far out. Now, looking forward, I really think that the pricing that we're starting to establish now is probably a good level to budget and project off of. There'll be some up and down to it like typical, but I think we're coming to a point where the fear of the way high or way lows is going to come to an even point. Things that could affect that, since I have to bring them up, natural disasters are always a problem. Hurricanes will, shut down production in the south and also spike demand. They are definitely a possibility. This is scheduled to be forecasted to be one of the worst hurricane seasons in several years. That remains to be seen, and hopefully it won't. Forest fires is another big issue. I was told yesterday that out in Vancouver, it was 112 degrees and everything's getting incredibly dry. And they're very fearful of heavy forest fires out west. Things that can help. More people going back to work and getting back to their normal routines is helping. As labor gets a little bit better and gets more traditional, that should help with production. That should improve with our trucking. The more people that get vaccinated and the less time off people have for those issues, that also helps. So trucking could take 3 weeks of lead time away from things. That would severely help our problems, and doing that would help improve the costs that you see. The other thing that's a huge factor, and other people can speak more intelligently about that than me, is the interest rates. If they raise our interest rates, that will put a very quick slow to the building cycle, with costs being up and money not as cheap as it is right now. That would slow a lot of projects down and free more material up, which would eventually drive the pricing down. But that's way out in the future after they do any kind of a change in the interest rate. So that's kind of my 2 cents worth. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try and field them.
So asking you when everything will be back to normal, you have that answer nailed down?
My best guess is for when we establish our new level and get completely back to normal with the resin issues and everything else, my best guess is probably towards the end of 2023. It's going to be that long of a full recovery. We'll make good strides through 2022, but we're going to have some pockets of very difficult times with shortages just because production's not going to be able to keep up with the pace that we're at.
Thank you. If anyone has questions, you can drop them in the chat box, and we'll actually circle back and do questions for whomever at the end. Oh, we do have a question. Who is working on the trucking issue?
From my side, most of our vendors have started networking with each other, even cross competition, sharing if there was a good trucking company to help improve things. But I don't know of anybody specifically working on the trucking issue.
I can speak on that a little bit if you want. So in my line of the business, a lot of the manufacturers are running into issues with not having enough containers, or having enough, which the containers obviously create the opportunity for trucking. There are still containers sitting in the docks over in the Carolinas and out in California from December that are still waiting to be received in through customs. So some of the manufacturers, to bring production back up and bring inventory back up, they're actually leapfrogging and they're air freighting things in now, which is a tricky business, because you're going to end up potentially, once the customs breaks free and they get enough people to start receiving product through customs, and all that product eventually shows up, they're going to be doubled up on a lot of materials. So, which is good news for pricing eventually, to bring it back down, because the manufacturers will actually be overstocked and then they'll have to try to offload it. My company alone, we have 6 containers sitting in our parking lot because our warehouse is actually maxed out and we ran out of space for product. So now we're bringing in containers, and just container pricing is another issue. You've got containers that would normally be $500 are now like $1,500 to $2,000 for a container. So that's another issue is, not only do we not have drivers to actually drive product from point A to point B, you don't have, you have added costs, which is also helping the cost of inflation on product too. I will say, Mike, you hit a lot of really, really good points, and a lot of stuff that I've been hearing in other meetings that I've been going to. I'm sure David probably can hit on the finance part of it pretty good. I heard from someone else over at the NAHB that they're not anticipating the interest rates going up until sometime mid to end of next year. It's a guess, but that's what I heard. I'm just taking it's secondhand information. Now, as far as Ferguson is concerned, we have 3, at least I deal with 3 major categories: plumbing, lighting, and appliances. And we have easily 200 plus vendors that we deal with. There isn't a single vendor out there that isn't affected. And some of them, the ones that are a little bit more vertically integrated, that have, they manufacture a lot of their own parts and products and don't rely on other people, they seem to be thriving a little bit more. Some companies have better forecasters than others, and they've been able to ramp up. They ramped up early when they started seeing stuff hitting the fan here last year. But to your point, also, I don't anticipate any sense of normalcy until middle to end of next year at the earliest with some of these manufacturers. On the plumbing side, some of the big names, like Delta, for instance, just sent out a memo about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. They have eliminated all of their accessories, and they have pared down the brand by at least 40%, and they're only making the top selling SKUs because they're running out of material to even make the product. Some of the problems they're running into is they're getting material, the core material to actually make the valves and to make the chrome and the plating material and stuff from overseas, and they can't. The one factory or mine that they get the mineral from to make the valves, they ran out of the actual iron ore, I want to say in October of last year, and they said they had enough minerals left over and to last them till January. And lo and behold, about February, they no longer have Roman tub filler valves anywhere in the country. You just can't get them, so they had to discontinue Roman tub fillers until further notice. Moving over to appliances, the appliance manufacturers are getting hit really hard. They have so many components going into it that are getting affected. Wiring harness, different components that go into making the products. I just heard last week there's a local company who makes the locking mechanism that holds the dishwashers closed. They sell them to Bosch dishwashers, and they said they're running out of material to make that locking mechanism. And once they're out, Bosch will have no ability to finish their dishwashers, essentially basically closing down the dishwasher line going forward unless they can find another source. And Bosch makes over 20,000 dishwashers a day. So that's just, it's one hit after the next. Many of the manufacturers are running into that. Had one where Sub-Zero had some product coming over for the refrigerators. And, one of the containers during high seas was thrown overboard to save the ship. I mean, the ice storm down in Texas, that was a huge hit for the refrigeration industry. All the foam insulation that insulates the walls of most manufacturers for the refrigerators is made down in Texas. And that was the main supplier of all American-made refrigerators, and the foreign-made refrigerators or the plant that made foam for refrigerators got stuck in customs. So, I mean, that's why lead times on refrigerators right now are hovering around 6 to 9 months. Computer chips. That's the other thing is just because everyone was working from home, everyone started ramping up on the number of computers that they had and phones and that kind of stuff. That played a role in the quantity of computer chips being used for that. So the material used for making those chips is, running low to non-existent. So companies like Whirlpool, KitchenAid, Frigidaire, Electrolux, they're having to pause production on, easily 50% of their product line until next year at the earliest. Electrolux discontinued all laundry. They are not making any laundry right now until further notice. Whirlpool, same thing. Some of these manufacturers are just struggling to provide any product. As far as lighting is concerned, hasn't been hit that hard, just because there's not a lot of moving components. So, and the way lighting works is they usually make a certain amount of production. They'll bring it in, they'll introduce it, and then once they sell through it, they discontinue it. So it's kind of really hasn't affected it as much, just because of the simple fact that that's kind of how they've been running the industry as it is. So there might be a little bit of lag and maybe less in productions, but there hasn't been too much turmoil in the lighting side of it, at least from what I can tell. Ferguson as a company, we're in all 50 states, and we see different markets are reacting different ways. One thing that we're trying to do is loosen the reins on how tight we hold our deliveries. In a normal year, we would say, if you need product in 4 months for an order, and it takes us 3 weeks to get the product in, we're going to order it maybe in 4 to 5 weeks from the date that you need it. Well, now we're placing orders, the second that you tell us you need it, and we need it in 4 to 6 months, we're going to order it now and hold on to the product. And unfortunately, we're now maxing out our warehouse space, and we have well over $12 million just in Cleveland in our warehouse there, just sitting there waiting for other product to come in. So we'll have, one of the builders is on the call here today. We're in that exact situation where we brought in, all the product, but we're waiting on 2 or 3 things, and we're not ready to ship anything until we have all the product in. Well, that's multiply that times every builder, every job that's going on. And now we're stuck with a bunch of stuff that we can't do anything with because we're incomplete. The builders are being left making difficult decisions. Do we install everything we have and then try to find a temporary piece? We've done that a couple of times, but then that gets costly. You're buying a $400 range as a temporary holding spot just so the homeowner's cooking. And then, what do you do with that range when it's all said and done? So it's, unfortunately, the manufacturers don't know. They're trying their best. Every one of them's looking to see what angles they can do, what products they need to either phase out or temporary hold. And then they're trying new sources and new avenues to try to bring product in. Trying to, shipping is, again, going back to the shipping, getting product to us. They may have it, they just can't get it to us, so then it's, well, can we send our truck to go get it? Ferguson has a very strong logistics team, and, we're able to transport product from one warehouse to a distribution center or vice versa. Some companies have actually called us to ship product for them. So it's a team effort, and we're gonna do what we can. I think that is enough wonderful information. It's all paradise as long as you have virtual reality. It's the best I can do.
I love that picture. All right, on to our NAHB economics lesson. We're ready.
Jen, can you enable the screen sharing for me?
I absolutely can.
Not that anyone wants to look at an economist graphs.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay. So first, obviously, thank you all for having me here, or wherever you are possibly viewing this after the fact. Yeah, so the past year and a half or so has really been a lesson in supply chain whiplash, and so I've got quite a few slides. I'll skip over many because of kind of the focus of where we're going, what's already been said, etc. But so The issues, as Steve was just saying, the issue has long been more than just lumber. Lumber, got the spotlight, and rightly so, toward the beginning of the pandemic taking hold in the U.S. I believe the first email that I flagged, and you better believe that I have it in a folder for my annual review, that I sent to our senior management at NAHB, that said that lumber was going to become a big problem was June 8th of last year. So it's been a year, and things since then have only gotten worse, to include more and more materials. But kind of how did we get here? This says, just ask Ernie Hemingway. There's a well-known line from The Sun Also Rises. One of the characters asks the other, how did you go bankrupt? And he says, well, two ways: gradually, then suddenly. And that's really what we've seen. The rises and falls and lumber, as they usually are in periods of high volatility, have been fairly sharp. That has been the case with more and more materials as time has gone on, particularly over the last 6 to 7 months, to the point that they're up. The way that the Bureau of Labor Statistics keeps it, building materials writ large are 23% more expensive than they were roughly a year ago. So in NAHB's HMI, Builder Confidence, NAHB Wells Fargo, I'm obliged to say, by contract, HMI that comes out each month. We had a question a couple months ago, just asking builders, what the shortages they were dealing with were, and top of the list, as people would expect, are appliances. Then you have your framing lumber, your structural panels, windows and doors, trusses, copper wiring, and the list goes on and on. The one thing that I take away from this slide is that some materials have been in short supply over the past year. Some have been in short supply for a very extended period of time. Some have gone through periods of short supply. Refrigerators being one of those. The first go around was the building season last year. That was due to timing differences of lockdowns, particularly in Mexico, and then this year we've seen the effects from the petrochemical industry that's highly concentrated in Texas, and the effects that the winter storm had on that. But copper wiring has caught up in the last month or two. I'm sure that the share of builders saying that is in extreme shortage has gone up quite a bit since we asked this. We're tracking lumber. Obviously, this goes back to the beginning of last year. As Mike said, we have seen a recent decline, which is great news. I won't belabor this point, just historically, because he did a great job going through it. But even more important, perhaps, for builders, developers, is the volatility of lumber, and actually, a reporter wanted to talk yesterday, I think, about what we thought the decline in lumber prices would do to builder confidence. And so we looked in the data, and it turns out that builder confidence tends to fall regardless of whether prices are increasing or decreasing, if they are doing so over a long period of time and at a quick rate. And builder confidence tends to increase during periods of lumber price stability. So confidence, and that's because about a third of the index is weighted on forward-looking component, and it's just hard as hell to plan when the prices of inputs to your business are volatile. It's a lot easier to plan, even if the planning is not pleasant, when those prices are stable. I will skip this. This is my SPF prices very accurately predict Southern SYP prices by about 1 to 3 weeks. And then everyone kind of knows what's happened to lumber futures over the last month or so. I guess it's last month and a half now. They've fallen by roughly half. This is just something to keep in mind. I mentioned this to our members when I speak with them. I mention it to reporters just to keep in mind that the declining prices have been a great thing. And they are a great thing. We hope that those continue and stabilize at some point. But we saw this last year, this same effect in the last part of 2020, when they fell by 40%. And right now, they're right around that. They've now decreased by more in percentage terms. They haven't reached that bottom point in nominal terms, which was roughly 550 for the future, actually, and for the random lengths contract. So we keep a watchful eye on things still. For those that buy a lot of Canadian lumber, and everyone uses it, but the use, for obvious reasons, tends to increase the further north the builder is located. The tariffs on Canadian lumber have certainly not helped. They have tended to increase volatility of pricing over the last 30 years, as long as this dispute's been running, 40 years, I guess. But little attention is paid in our industry to the Canadian dollar US dollar exchange rate. And the US imports, I think, $650 billion worth of goods from Canada each year. And we get a lot of building materials from Canada, and it's not just lumber. So keeping an eye on this helps regardless of anything else, what the real prices of some things that you're paying for that are coming from Canada. Raw inputs to fasteners, for example, are a really good example. Anything made of aluminum, get a lot of aluminum from Canada. And the dollar is down 15% since last March. It's down 4% year to date. It saw an increase because of what happened at the Fed's meeting a couple of weeks ago, when Fed officials got more hawkish on inflation. But it's something that we've got to be mindful of as you watch the nominal price increases, to keep a tab open on your internet browser for the Canadian exchange rate. Like Mike said, OSB has just, and structural panels writ large, just exploded in price over the past year or so, and also been in just exceptionally short supply. The good news, at least from the random lengths index, is that the price per 1,000 square feet at the mill level flattened last week, and it actually declined as of last night marginally. And so who knows? It's unpredictable market, but that's certainly a positive sign, as that's the first time in months that any of the structural panel prices have declined over the course of a week. But it's been steel mill products are up 70%, and this is a graph of kind of the inputs that go into the end products that you use as inputs to construction. So 70% filtered through a couple parts of the supply chain turns into a much greater increase by the time it gets to you. Drywall has more recently, kind of over the past 3 months, I'd say, become more and more scarce. Prices increased, and they were scheduled to increase last year prior to the pandemic. But they have continued to get increases, and I believe that manufacturers are still putting out price increase notices. This on the far right of this is an index for construction materials that the Bureau of Labor Statistics keep. I point this particular index out just because that's the index that includes that index is weighted a lot more heavily toward things that are used in abundance in standard infrastructure, your roads, your bridges. And I've heard a lot of people curious, if not worried, about what happens to building materials prices should a large infrastructure package go through. So this is a better kind of a better barometer of those costs, and they're up 30% over the last 12 months. Just one quick note, the good news is that in my cursory kind of looking through a bunch of infrastructure packages that have been signed into law over the past 30 years, and prices of goods, they have not typically resulted in astronomically increased prices. There's a reason for that, but that's for like a public policy classroom. What have our builders been doing, or at least our survey respondents? Price escalation clauses were all the rage, but became much more common in 2020. You still have plenty of developers, builders that do not like to use them, regardless of how you split the price escalation, if you do split it between buyer and builder. But the two that are circled here are delaying building or sales when your costs spike, and laying the foundation and then pausing before the framing. This is maybe the most important slide that I currently have, in that we began to get word last July-ish that people were starting to do this. People were starting to put projects on hold in the middle of projects. And we heard that from more and more builders as time went on. Then we saw prices decline. So there were structural reasons in the supply chain for prices to fall last fall for lumber. But part of that was a fall in demand that had kind of aggregated as the year went on from people delaying projects. Well, what happens when one person starts buying, it props the price up, it tends to find its trough, and the next person's going to want to buy before it gets higher. The next person wants to buy before it gets higher than that, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those projects tend to come back online at the same time, which can really serve to exacerbate that big supply demand imbalance once again. And that's what we saw. Prices went up 150% after they hit that bottom. And builders by and large did not see the 40% decrease in mill prices. They saw things on the order of 20% to 25%. Moving forward, the vaccination rate is really, really important. Get people back on the job. I've heard it already. Not just that, but making businesses less trigger shy, giving businesses more certainty about the economic environment. The more certainty there is, the better it is for spending and investment. We have a fairly solid acceleration in economic growth forecast for next quarter stays high over 2021, falls into 2022, and then kind of stagnates at about 1.5% in those out years, 1.75%. I think Steve mentioned mortgage rate, Fed funds rates. Don't see Fed funds hikes until 2023. Keeping a much closer eye since Chairman Powell made his comments a couple weeks ago about just how transient they believe inflation is or is not. But as of right now, that's still our official forecast. And balance sheets have improved actually over this recession, which buoyed the housing market even more. We saw savings rates go up, disposable income go up. So people's debt positions on the household level are very healthy. This is a big contrast to the last housing boom. So I'm going to stop there. I already went much longer than I wanted to, but I'll stop sharing and cede the floor to Nick.
Hey guys, I'm going to talk a little bit about everything we've talked about thus far from the perspective of what do you do legally to protect yourself. Let me see if I can. There we go. But there's my big dumb face. So David stole one of my little factoids I have here, and the NAHB did a survey that said that 47% of builders are now incorporating price escalation clauses into their construction contracts, which is great that 47% of builders are taking those steps to protect themselves legally from price increases or cost increases. But it also says that that 47% didn't have those provisions in their contract before, and unfortunately, a lot of people these days are reactive legally when it's much more beneficial to be proactive. Take a look at your contracts ahead of time and put these things in place so you don't have to deal with these things after the fact. The other thing that the NAHB said, one of their economists, I imagine David knows him, is ultimately home buyers and renters will pay the price. Based on current lumber prices, we estimate a $35,000 increase to new home prices. Now, I imagine that's a $35,000 increase to an average home price, so it could be a little bit lower, and I imagine in a lot of cases, it's going to be much, much higher. And I don't know a lot of builders or really any company that could take that kind of hit on multiple projects. And if you don't have these kind of things built into your contract, you could end up being in that boat. If you sign a contract with a customer for a fixed price, it's going to be difficult unless you have certain contract provisions to increase that or pass that on to them, which is what you really need to do, or else you're eating $35,000 or more on every home you're building. The same thing goes for the suppliers. We've had some clients that have recently got into trouble by quoting material prices, quoting a scope, getting a purchase order. We had one, the client quoted it in December. They got a purchase order in January with an anticipated delivery of February. The project didn't go in February. It didn't go in March. It didn't go in April. And now we have a client who has been sitting on materials for 5 months when they could have been selling them at a much higher price. The flip side of that, of course, was a client who didn't purchase the materials when the purchase order came in, and now their customer is calling for the materials, and they're 50% over what their quoted cost was, and so they're just losing a ton of money on that. This first one here is just a let me see if I can. Oops. There we go. Now I can't read my own slide. This is just an example of an escalation clause. The NAHB actually has published a sample escalation clause. Let's see if I can pop it open here. Personally, I think this is a little too much. So I reworded it and cut it down a bit. And essentially what it says is that if the price of materials increases by a certain percentage, and you can see here where I've put in where it could be filled in by more than that percentage after the construction contract is executed, that the builder can provide notice to the customer, and the customer can cancel the agreement by providing written notice within 14 days. If the customer does that, then the builder would be entitled to keep anything they've been paid up to that point, be entitled to be compensated for any work that's in place that they haven't been paid for yet, as well as a percentage of their prorated anticipated profit. If the customer doesn't cancel within 14 days, then they're bound by the quoted price increase by the builder. Another one we have here, these are some price protection clause examples, and these are geared more towards the suppliers. The first one basically says that the customer has to take delivery by a certain date, and if they don't, then the customer is obligated to pay for any price increases after that date. And then the second one is what many suppliers probably already have or include in their terms and conditions for quotes, which is that an estimate or a bid just automatically expires after a certain period, normally 30 days or 60 days, something like that. The last one is a little bit more uncommon, and this is a storage fee clause. So this basically says that customer has to take delivery by a certain date, and if they don't, then the supplier has the option to store them and then charge the customer for them. And then at some point after a certain period of time, they can give notice to the customer and either continue storing the materials at the customer's cost or sell them or otherwise dispose of them, just so they're not sitting on materials for months and months at a time, stuck with them because their customer is not ready to take delivery of them. And that's it. I mean, it's pretty quick. I think I did mine in like 4 minutes.
No problem. Nick, if you want to stop sharing, we can bring the.
Oh
camera
yeah.
back
All
up.
right, hold on. There we go.
Thank you. Mike had a comment that he wanted to offer about planning ahead and how that can help with preventing headaches. So Mike, if you want to jump back in and add your thought, that would be great.
One of the things that we've tried to do to help our customers is to educate them on when our lead times were extending and what we were hearing proactively. I remember when I first started, people were talking about you had to order your kitchen cabinets when you started digging a foundation. Now you have to order that 30 days beforehand, along with your windows and doors, and make sure that your shingles are in stock because the supply side issues are so bad. So what I wanted to say was, if you plan at least 60 days, preferably 90 days ahead for your project and what your needs are, and can try and solidify those choices, you'll save 3 or 4 months of headaches down the road if there is a delay or anything else, because the suppliers have the opportunity to try and get that in for you and have it ready when you need it, as opposed to waiting on it. The customers who heeded our direction did much better than those that call and say, hey, I want this in a week, when it's a 3-month lead time to get it.
Can I add to that? I agree with that 100%. And if there are any products or items that need to be selected for any home that are fixed measurements, why not have it pre-selected? Appliances is one of them. The number of toilets, the number of there's certain things aren't going to change based on how the house is being built. If you're off by a few inches on a wall or something like that, it's not going to affect any of that product. So I would, and I've been doing the same thing, encouraging all the builders, make sure your homeowners are in early and they're making their product selections. And then if they're doing that, ideally the salesperson of whatever product it is that they're picking out will be able to tell them, okay, now that we have this selected, we know what it's going to be. Here is the current, projections for lead times. This is when you should order it. That way you can, again, be proactive is going to make it much more tolerable for a lot of people. Building a house is a stressful situation for everybody. And, this environment obviously is compounding it and making it a lot worse. So anytime we can give people advice and say, this is what's going to make it a lot easier, smoother, and more enjoyable, and making those things. And quite frankly, it makes it easier for you to build the house. If the homeowner isn't lagging behind on making all the decisions, you can actually build the house in a more timely fashion and make it a lot smoother. So you can just keep banging out the house instead of, all right, well, we got to wait for the Jones family to go pick out their flooring, got to go pick out this, got to go pick out that. And you're waiting on them. Instead, if you're being proactive, not only are you getting ahead of the curve for product availability, but you're also getting them to make decisions up front instead of at the back end.
Lori, did you have questions for anyone on the group?
I do not. I think I'm pretty good. Did you have anything come in?
I think I've asked everything that I had seen. So any last words of wisdom from anyone that you thought of that would benefit us?
I think one of the things that I heard is truly that communicating with the customer is the key. And the more you communicate, the more you become the trusted advisor. Whether you take a snippet from David's economic presentation or you take the facts that Mike or Steve have presented to you, the more you can communicate, the more they understand what's going on. Years ago, I attended a crisis management seminar, and there were 3 things that they always talked about. Communicate first, communicate fast, communicate frequently, most importantly, communicate truthfully. I think that's really the key going forward. We listen to the media and it says, I'll just give you one example. It'll say the baby boomers are the largest generation, and then they'll talk about the millennials. Well, in reality, if we put those facts into context, the baby boomers are 72 million people and the millennials are 71 million people. There really isn't a big difference between those 2 groups of people, but the media likes to make it seem like that gap is really big. So the more we can become that trusted advisor to sort out the good information and the skewed information or selectively presented information, the more it makes us and our clients be linked to a good, effective, and efficient process that they want to repeat and they want to do it again, whether they're upsizing or downsizing in years to come. So I encourage everybody to communicate. Take all of these folks' information, keep them handy so that you can stay updated on their next thoughts as we move forward, because it's as we also saw, an ever-changing, moving target.
I'll send you, Lori, my presentation. You guys, you all can send it to whomever would like it.
That would be great. We'll also put it on our website. People can take a look at it.
That's fine.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for participating in the conversation. This was really good information, and I know Lori and I very much appreciate your time being here to share this with our HBA members. So thank you
so
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Have a good day.
Also-
Thanks, everybody.
Aloha.
Exactly.